Good afternoon, Dr. Fennoy. Welcome. And it is now your turn.
All right.
So we're going to start with District 1 and work our way up. Everybody asks a question, and they get a second question after that.
Okay.
Mrs. McQuinn.
Good afternoon, Dr. Fennoy.
Good afternoon.
With our limited resources, what would you do differently to attain the outcomes we expect for our students?
So with our limited resources, part of what needs to happen, in my current role as the Chief Operating Officer, there's a reality around being as efficient as possible so that we can then redirect resources to the academic side of the house. I think since I've been in this role with this amazing team, we have studied every avenue in the Department of Operations, and there have been opportunities in which we can then redirect our resources, make sure that we are being as efficient as possible, working with the finance department. It has been a learning experience thinking about all of the businesses we actually run here at the School District of Palm Beach County, and having this opportunity to sit with the business community and just outside stakeholders to help us understand what we can do better. I think the more we focus on that avenue, we can then be able to make sure that we have the dollars associated to make sure our academic side of the house and those dollars get pushed down to the schools.
Follow-up. Do you see some opportunities for us to be able to do that, to operate more efficiently and redirect that money?
Yes, ma'am. One area specifically is our fleet. We manage, most people don't know this, we manage 800 buses and 900 white fleet vehicles in this district. And to maintain a fleet of that size requires significant amounts of maintenance, petroleum, et cetera. And what we realized is during the recession, a lot of things we just didn't do. So now that the referendum, the taxpayers have allowed us this opportunity with the referendum to rebuild our fleet, some of these processes need to be outsourced because we just don't have the resources to build new tanks and pumps and maintain that. So we actually didn't budget for a lot of these things over the last couple of years. So if we're going to start budgeting for those things, we need to figure out a way to maybe outsource it to reduce costs.
So, Mrs. Brill.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Fennoy.
Good afternoon.
What do you consider to be your greatest strengths as a potential superintendent and your greatest weaknesses as a potential superintendent?
I believe my greatest strength is my ability to collaborate and work with people. I think over the years, and my resume reflects this, that I've built great teams and worked collaboratively with people in a way that has yielded results. What the resume doesn't reflect is that all of this was done with people and with dignity and respect. You don't have to be dogmatic and authoritarian to actually have people do great work for you. High achievement takes place within the framework of high expectations. I think the manner in which we work with each other allows that to move forward. I think my weaknesses in terms of being a superintendent, specifically for here, the District of Palm Beach County, is I'm at a disadvantage because of my role. I was like the known unknown. People knew I was here, but they don't know anything about me. And so part of the challenge is now, if given this opportunity by this board, is to build relationships with people, to come out of behind the operations realm and really start talking to people so they can realize that for 15 years, I was on the academic side of the house. And the last 2 years have just been my opportunity to understand business and develop the business acumen that allows us to think about the totality of the school district.
So, Mrs. Whitfield.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Fennoy. I wanted to ask you about Project Purpose-Built Communities. Specifically, do you support public and private partnerships which are designed to raise support from the philanthropic communities? And within that, how do you feel about project-based learning?
So the answer is yes. When I was the executive director for New Leaders, that was my first experience working with the business community and the philanthropic community in order to raise the revenue necessary to run that nonprofit. There are things that the board just can't spend money on. This is, call it what it is. And so our business partners in the philanthropic community allow us opportunities to incubate ideas in a way that does not, they don't have the same type of burdens that we have in terms of policies and regs. I think as it relates to the purpose-built community, let's just be really honest, we have a lot of families and young people who we need to worry about children before they're born in a lot of instances. And I think helping parents understand what they do during the prenatal stage, what happens once they're born, how do we get them connected with the appropriate resources? And the purpose-built community model allows for that to happen. It's this whole, birth to graduation pipeline. It is a real thing. Many of us take it for granted because in my middle-class world, my wife and I do all those things for our children. My sister had her first child at 14. She didn't have those type of resources. So being connected to a community through something like Purpose Built allows us to really wrap our arms around the whole child and the whole family to allow them to move forward to prosperous outcomes.
And let me give the same follow-up again. How do you see yourself as the helping with the philanthropic arm or as the forward-facing part of the school district to help with philanthropy?
Well, part of it is being active in those communities, understanding who the key players are, understanding that the superintendent and his or her team, along with the governance structure of the board, those relationships and fostering them and cultivating them is part of the superintendent's role. Our current superintendent's done a masterful job of that work, and I don't see any reason why we would stop that momentum, but that becomes a focus of the new superintendent.
Mr. Barbieri.
Good afternoon, Dr. Fennoy.
Good afternoon, sir.
As you know, this board has had many discussions about the need to have an employee in each school whose only responsibility is to handle the social and emotional needs of our children. What plan would you put in place to provide support for students in crisis?
Well, as the only candidate here who has a child in a Palm Beach County school, let me be really clear. What happened to our friends in the South scared all of us. And those of us that are parents who I drop my son off every day, and I do everything in my power to pick him up every day. And I probe him for questions around what his day was like, and did someone bully you, or did you stand up for yourself, whatever happens. And I think part of the reality, when I was a principal and when I was a teacher and principal manager, kids need to be connected to someone in that building. Those relationships, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's social media or just the tablets, whatever it is causing people to not to connect with one another anymore. And we're missing something. There's the education part of the system, and then there's the human side. And so, absolutely, we have to figure out a way to provide the necessary resources so that a child in a building has some adult that they can connect with and trust. And it's not always about data and test scores. Sometimes it's about just survival and who I am and depression and all these things that many of us as parents are struggling to deal with our own children. So having this intimate relationship around the social emotional piece is something we absolutely cannot ignore anymore.
Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you. Hello, Dr. Fennoy. My question deals with succession planning.
Mm-hmm.
How would you put together a plan to develop a pipeline for future leaders, teachers as well as administrators in this district?
So I've had a lot of experience with pipeline development work through new leaders and as area superintendent. Part of one of the challenges we often have is, do we actually identify teacher leaders and other teachers in buildings and give them opportunities to experience something other than what they're doing every day if they want? I don't really believe in forcing people to do anything. I think there has to be a desire to take on leadership roles. There's nothing wrong with being a career teacher. And I think for those people who want the opportunity, I think the regional instructional superintendent model allows us an opportunity to think about the pipeline, putting people in different types of environments so that they can experience work from both ends. I had the luxury of working in inner city schools and very affluent schools in Windermere, Florida. That experience taught me one thing. At the end of the day, kids are kids, and they all have challenges. And I think being afforded the opportunity to be in both places quickly advanced my leadership skills because those challenges are real. But I absolutely think we have an opportunity with our current structure to identify key people, create a system, not just textbook learning or case studies or reading articles, but really putting them in position to experience all the realities of the leadership opportunities that are available to them. So ultimately, they can make a decision. Do you really want to do this? Because for a lot of us, I remember as assistant principal for Dr. Vosa, there came a point where I thought, oh, he doesn't know what he's doing. And then I became a principal, and I was like, oh, maybe he did. That's just part, experience is part of the growth. And in that same vein, you have to provide safeguards for people to make mistakes. Everyone in this room has made mistakes. That's how you grow. So you can't penalize people when they try to do something different. So creating a safe space for people to learn and grow is what I would do in the pipeline development program. Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. Hi, Dr. Fennoy.
Good morning. Afternoon.
So we all know that reading is fundamental.
Yes, ma'am.
So what would you do to accelerate the reading proficiency for each student subgroup?
So here's the truth. You know, the state of Florida and every state in the country, you know, when we started doing, you know, FSA or FCAT or whatever it was, as a principal, and I'm guilty of it too, you would literally look at the formula and say, okay, who's my best teacher? I'm going to put them in third grade. This is what I've learned from experience. Your best teachers need to be in kindergarten 1, 2. That's where they need to be. That's the foundation. So you take someone, again, I'll use myself as an example. You know, between my wife and I, we have 5 degrees. We read to our children all the time. They're exposed to things. They travel. They see things. So their level of sight word acquisition is tremendous, just by virtue of who their parents are. Well, there's a whole other population of people who they're spending every day trying to figure out how to feed their children. And it is not necessarily their number one thing. So I think in the school setting, we have to have, and let me be very clear, I think a lot of our kindergarten and first grade and second grade teachers are great people. When I was in Fulton County, these were some of the most warm, nurturing people in the world. But they have to learn how to teach reading. You have to be clear in how you talk to children. When I looked at schools, really how I changed the model in Fulton was I looked at our dual language programs and this idea of complete and total infusion, and really being deliberate in the type of words that our children were exposed to in the early grades. Because if you really think about it from a logical perspective, you put that much energy and time in actually pre-K1, K1, 2, then the third grade isn't about bridging a gap. You're now just teaching the third grade standards, which will allow those kids to be successful. So, and in that same space, I think it's important to understand that you have to be deliberate in the type of literature your children look at. I think, you know, when you select guided reading materials or level readers, it's important for all of our children to be able to see themselves in what they read. Because once you get to the secondary level, kids, just like everyone in this room, we read what we like to read, things that are interesting to us. And so I think it's important for the secondary level to make sure that the type of literature we expose our children to at some point put them in a position to see themselves in that literature in a different light. And also for those children to see that every villain doesn't have to look a certain way and every hero doesn't have to look a certain way. Because I think then it forces all of us to recognize that we're all humans and all of us are good and bad depending on the day.
Dr. Fennoy, share with us what you expect from us as a board in order to move this district forward.
My expectations of the board would, one, if to select me, just to give me a chance. I think there's just something to be said about who I am and where I sit in American society. I think I have done a lot of work over the 17 years and produced a lot of results. I think I would expect the board to be honest with me. I would expect the board to challenge me and to be brutally honest when I'm wrong and when I'm going in the wrong direction. I would expect the board to make sure that I meet the right people. You know, the superintendency is a macro and micro political position. And let's just be really clear what it is. And you all hold the relationships. And if we're going to be real honest around who I am, I don't have those relationships. So I need you to make sure that I'm in the right places at the right times. And then just to be fair with me as it relates to my own professional growth in this work. So, you know, I expect the board to be collaborative with me and honest. Those are like two big things with me. It's just tell me the truth, and I'll make sure that I tell you the truth at all times.
Thank you very much. Now we'll do the second round of questions.
Okay.
Mrs. McQuinn.
How would you describe the current culture of our school district? Please be specific. How will you keep a pulse on the system's climate and culture?
So I have a unique position, I guess, being in another division from the academic side. You know, our core business is teaching and learning. It's the schools, right? And so I think with the development of the strategic plan and the early efforts in year 1, 2, and 3, I think we as a district were a lot more heavy-handed than probably necessary. I think there's a moment in time where the culture is demanding that we give some, what I would call, bounded autonomy back to the schools and the communities to dictate the next phase. I don't think the expectations should change moving forward. It's the how that may need to change. I think with so many unique communities, there's not a one-size-fits-all to how do we educate our children. And I think we've hired some great principals and teacher leaders and teachers, and we have great people in the community who know what these communities need. And we've got to start, creating a level of synergy around the brain power in those spaces to figure out the next layer of the work. And so I think the culture is one of, I think we have a great culture, but it absolutely has some room for improvement. But I think that improvement comes through just recognizing and allowing our people to be the great educators that they are.
And the second part was, how will you keep a pulse on the system's climate and culture?
Well, there's only one way to keep a pulse, and that's to be there checking on it. Like literally, if our principals and teachers are having meetings, the superintendent has to be a part of those things to the best of his or her ability. I think, being an active participant in community meetings, business meetings, I think, again, there's no substitute for human interaction. A phone call sometimes just doesn't work. Watching on television doesn't work. FaceTiming doesn't work. I've tried to have virtual dates with my wife. It doesn't work. I have to literally take her somewhere. And so, again, part of that is just being present and being there for our people and understanding that's the role that you're signing up for. Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Sproul.
Thank you. Dr. Fennoy, what is your philosophy on delegating authority? How do you then maintain accountability?
Yeah, so I think when you think about the enormity of the role, you have to delegate authority, I think. But part of being a manager or a leader is setting very clear expectations of your people. You draw lines and sands around things that are unacceptable, and when they cross those lines, you deal with it. But you don't micromanage people. You do not get the best out of people. Well, let me speak for myself. You don't get the best out of me by micromanaging me. You get the best out of me by giving me the freedom and space to do my job to the best of my ability, creating a cadence of accountability where we check in, we talk, we brainstorm together. But again, being clear, the expectations are the expectations, and that if you don't have the skill or the will to meet that expectation, we may have to go in a different direction. There's nothing wrong with that, and maybe that's not the right seat for you, but absolutely, you have to give people the space to breathe and learn, and then create the safe space for people to innovate and make some mistakes. I think some of the greatest people in our culture have made a whole lot of mistakes before they got to that one thing that won them the Nobel Peace Prize.
Mrs. Whitfield.
Thank you. Can you tell me how you will handle conflict and criticism within this position?
So conflict and criticism. So my father spent 22 years in the military. I'm a military brat. My parents are from Detroit, Michigan, from the mean streets of Detroit, Michigan. And so I think part of, conflict can be handled in certain ways. There are certain ways that you don't handle it professionally. And I think part of that process is just being transparent, being clear, not being afraid of it. So one of the things that I cannot stand are when people try to sugarcoat things. Tell me the truth. Tell me directly what the issue is so that we can get to a solution. And I think, and part of that is being respectful, doing a whole lot more listening than talking. I don't know why some people think if I out-talk you, then you'll understand what I'm saying. No. Again, I've been married 16 years, and I still haven't quite got it. I'm getting close to just listening. But I think that's part of the conflict resolution is being in it. And in some cases, you have to actually provide professional development around conflict resolution. Because I think it's such an emotional thing for some people. Me personally, I have been accused of being stoic. I just have a tendency to try to be in control of emotions because emotions are power. And when you lose your control of yourself, you're losing your power. The real power comes from sitting in it and just dealing with it. And then I just go home and cry. But I'm not going to show you that because I'm not going to give you that over me. And so I think that's part of the essence of being a true leader is that sometimes I believe, and I used to tell all my principals in Fulton and in Baltimore, I'm going to take the punishment so that you can do your job. And that's if a true leader understands that.
Mr. Barbieri.
Dr. Fennoy, as you know, Dr. Vosa has restructured the district into regions, and as you know, there is a regional superintendent and instructional superintendents.
Mm-hmm.
We also have a new organizational chart, which was substantially revised by Dr. Vosa.
Mm-hmm.
Please provide your thoughts as to whether you support the regional structure, what changes, not in personnel, but in structure only, that you believe should be made, if any, in the regional structure, and what changes, if any, you believe should be made in the organizational structure of the district.
Okay. So, Mr. Barbieri and board, I think one of the things that I believe is that no matter the program or structure, it's the fidelity of the people who execute that actually matter. So I don't have any opinion on whether or not it's effective or not. My question would be to myself would be, do the principals think it's effective? We need to spend some time talking to the people who think about it. What the structure is supposed to do is provide supports to schools. So in order for me to actually answer that effectively, I'd have to go talk to the people who are supposed to be supported by it. And I think that would be part of what I would have to do in the first 100 days is to ask that question. I think from what I can see, again, as a layperson on the outside of it, I think it's a wonderful structure. I think you have a small enough portfolio of schools for people to manage. They're the go-between between the board and the community. They can troubleshoot things in a quick, efficient manner. And then they're also in a place where they can report to executive staff about the realities of what's happening on the ground. I'm sure it needs to be tweaked. I mean, what system doesn't? And even in terms of our own structure at the executive cabinet level, again, I think it's part of a discussion with the entire team around what's effective and what's not effective. I know just from talking to all of you, a lot of people were confused why my office wasn't with the other executives. Well, maybe it was a good thing. But asking that question, like, so is the structure getting us the outcomes that we desire? And I think that's part of a conversation that has to be had as soon as the board selects their new superintendent.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you, Dr. Fennoy. This next question deals with actually student achievement.
Mm-hmm.
What have you done to positively impact student achievement with the assistance of teachers, principals, parents, and community? Can you tell me in detail some of your efforts to narrow or close the achievement gap?
Yes. So if you don't mind, I'd give you two examples. I think in the days where I actually managed schools, part of that work was making sure that our principals and leadership teams were in such a place that they work with the school governance council to think about the K-12 continuum. Graduation actually starts in kindergarten. And then there has to be a conversation, a consistent conversation between each level around what the net set of expectations are. I think one of the things that I have done is this idea of raising the floor and the ceiling simultaneously. You cannot put all your efforts in remediating kids at the expense of children who are doing well in school. You can't do that. So you have to figure out a way for the entire ship to rise. And I think what I've been able to do is really focus on subgroups, making sure that our literacy plans, there's a continuous achievement model, meaning that any child who is moving at a rapid pace and needs opportunities to learn and grow are afforded those opportunities. But all of that happens in collaboration with the principal and his or her leadership team. I think here in Palm Beach County, what I've done is help my bus drivers realize getting the kids on time matters in terms of student outcomes. Period. If they don't show up until the middle of the second period, that means they've lost a whole hour of school. that's a problem. And so our strategic plan is something that the operation division understands. They do impact that, and I think that motivates them to do more. Our food service workers understand if a baby can't focus because they're hungry, then their job actually does matter. If the maintenance and facilities team understands, in July, in August, if it's 140 degrees in the building, there's no learning going on. And so I think, even though I haven't been involved on the academic side of the house, really pushing our teams to understand where they sit in Palm Beach County directly impacts what principals and teachers can do in their buildings. Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. So data shows correlation between household income, wealth, and academic achievement. Here in Palm Beach County and other places, children living in poverty almost always underperform compared to their more affluent peers. We're the largest employer in Palm Beach County. Is it in our best interest to end poverty? And if so, what is the school district's role in doing so?
So, absolutely. I mean, it's in our best interest to end poverty. I think our role is to provide a world-class quality education for every child. I think it's also our role to do everything in our power to make sure that our low-wage workers get a living wage. Yes.
That's it. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. One of our challenges is dealing with the legislature. So can you share with us how you've worked with legislative issues in the past, and what is your role and what is the role of the board, and how does that tie into economic development of our county?
Well, currently, House Bill 7026 and 7069 are at the forefront of my mind. Whatever's going to happen as it relates to these security measures, we as a board and staff are going to be asked to deal with those things. I think when it comes to our facilities, we went to the taxpayers with a very specific plan, and 7069 came around, and some of those dollars are now gone. I think, our role is, one, to put our heads together and figure out the next steps. But when I go back to 7026, I recall when it was first rolling out, I was actually heading down to meet Mr. Barbieri and Glenda Sheffield and Ian Salzman at Olympic Heights in West Boca. And I had this moment driving, and I said, what if Donald didn't come home today? And it became very personal because, as a parent in Palm Beach County, so close to that situation, these legislative matters matter to me. They just matter because I too, even though I'm an employee of a district and responsible for security in one of my departments, I'm still a father first. And so as we think about what needs to happen in terms of communicating with our legislators, again, my role, if selected as a superintendent, is to be intimately involved in that. Now, back to an earlier question, Mr. Shaw, in reference to what our board are some master politicians, so you're going to have to help me understand and navigate that and put me in the right places to have those conversations. But yes, we are obviously, as a community, influenced by what happens at the legislative sessions. And we need to use whatever power or influence we do have to make sure that our needs are met at every turn.
Right. And a follow-up, and how does that tie into economic development here in the county?
Yeah, so, we're not a revenue-generating entity, so we have to rely on the taxpayers for our funds. I think for us, part of that process, I'm fortunate enough to be, one of my departments is the Office of Diversity and Business Practices, this idea of how do we make sure that local vendors get access to the dollars that the board is required to be a steward of, so that those dollars can be infused back into the community in which the dollars were generated from. I think that's our role, is trying to, just to be clear now, certain projects, there may not be enough local vendors to execute quickly enough, because as I have come to learn in my current role, the longer we take on projects, the more expensive they become. And so we need to make sure that our ROI, our return on investment, is solid, and that we are being the best stewards of the dollars that we possibly can.
Thank you. That concludes the questions, so you've got 4 minutes
Okay.
for a closing statement.
Well, first of all, let me just say how thankful, appreciative, and humble I am that you afforded me, of all people, to sit in front of you today. You know, I think, though, this very fast 3-week period has kind of brought me out of the shadows, and I think through one-on-one conversations with everyone at this dais and people in the community, I think what stands out to a lot of people is, I think people have just been surprised about my background or what I've done. But I'll say this to you, you know, I think I'm the only candidate that can literally sit down with the substitute teacher and the teacher and have an authentic conversation around that work. I can sit down with the assistant principal and the principal and have an authentic conversation around the joys and challenges of leading schools. I can sit down with cabinet members to talk about the challenges of managing such a Herculean district. But I can also have a conversation that other candidates can't have, which is how, you know, running the businesses of Palm Beach County. There's another candidate that can have that conversation. We run the largest restaurant in Palm Beach. We run the most massive transportation system in Palm Beach. We run the largest construction infrastructure program in Palm Beach. And I have been very blessed and thankful that this board gave me an opportunity 2 years ago to sit at the head of that amazing team. And I understand it well. And so the superintendent is not just the academic leader, he's also the business leader of the district. And I have that opportunity, I have that skill set today. And so I just thank you all again. Never did I imagine I would be here. My son keeps asking me, like, so what is it that you're gonna be doing? I'm like, hey man, you know, look, my steps are ordered by God. It is what it is. We're just gonna go through this. But I am just thankful for the opportunity for you to see me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.